Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Trade. I wondered if the minister could tell us if any imports are allowed under the China export agreement he's just told the House about.
Minister for Trade can choose to answer. Members on my left. Members on my left will cease interjecting. Member for Watson will cease interjecting.
Mr. Speaker, this is the sort of juvenile activity, because, of course, if Australia exports to China, China exports to us. It's an export agreement. It's an export agreement. Don't you understand? Don't you understand? That's an export for China, right? It's an they signed an agreement. But this is the level to which the opposition have taken this debate. You have not identified. You have not identified.
Just resume your seat for a second. There are members on my left will cease interjecting. Member for Barton resume his seat. Members on my left are interjecting far too often, far too loudly. I will deal with them if this continues. Has the minister concluded his answer? No? The minister.
China exports. They export.
Member for Jagga. Member for Grainler is warned.
Mr. Speaker, why are they carrying on in such a nonsensical way? Why have they not asked me one question about the detail of this issue? Right? Not one question. If you're so concerned about it, why don't you ask the person who negotiated this agreement about the detail? Why haven't you? Why haven't you? Why? I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. If you shut up, I'll tell you why. You want to listen? You want to find out? The reason is that you have not identified one thing in the worker protection area that is not the same as what applied under your government. Not one thing. There is nothing to negotiate because you have not identified one thing. This has gone through J. Scott, it's going through the Senate inquiry, it's gone through all sorts of intermediaries, all sorts of research groups and others. None of them have identified. Every one of them have confirmed that what we did in this deal, if you wouldn't mind, is identical to what the worker protections were under the Korean deal, the Japanese deal, the Chile deal.
Member for
all of those things are identical. And you have not laid a glove on this bill. Not a glove. And that's why you're carrying on with that nonsensical question.
Member for Wills.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Trade. This afternoon on Sky News, the minister was asked if it was hard to include mandatory labour market testing in enabling legislation for the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement. He said, "It's not difficult to do, but it does create all sorts of complications." If it's not difficult, why is the government refusing to safeguard Australian jobs?
Treasurer will cease interjecting. Minister for Foreign Affairs, Small Business Minister is delaying the Minister for Trade and Investment. The Minister for Trade and Investment.
Or Japan or Chile.
Treasurer will cease interjecting.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. He's valiantly opposed trade at every step for as long as I can remember, and that's your entitlement. It's your entitlement. But as a spokesman for the Labor Party, in question time, it tells us all something. It tells us all something, right? Yeah. Secondly,
member for Jagga.
A piece of legislation is not difficult to draft. I agree with that. I do agree with that. But it does create certain Well, listen to me and I'll tell you, OK? It does create complication. No, you're just free to, you're like a university student the way you carry on.
Member for Wakefield will leave under 94A. The Minister for Trade will continue.
Thanks.
Member for Rankin is warned.
Mr Speaker. Yeah, go on. Goose. Mr Speaker.
The Minister will continue. Member for Charlton. Member for Charlton, resume his seat. The Minister will resume his seat. The member for Charlton.
Understanding Order 90, the Minister made an unparliamentary remark regarding the member for Wakefield. I asked him to withdraw.
The Minister will withdraw.
I withdraw.
The Minister will continue.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It does cause complexities and complications, and the reason is that if we move legislation which makes all sorts of demands about making it mandatory in the Migration Act, when makes it mandatory in the Migration Act. You want to know the facts about the Act or not? You've asked not one question about the facts to me, and yet you won't listen to me when I get up here. Mr Speaker, it creates a complication because—
Member for Herbert.
It creates a complication because we're going to do things to China that we haven't done to any other country. That's the problem. And all of a sudden, it underscores the xenophobic, racist activities on your side of the House.
The Minister for Trade.
One question.
The Minister for Trade and Investment.
That's the first question you've asked
the Minister for Trade.
It's about the racists.
The Minister for Trade well knows he can't reflect on members opposite. He can reflect on a union campaign or a document. He must withdraw.
I withdraw if it was taken as personal. It was.
No, he's
I withdraw. The fact is, Mr Speaker, that the request that Labor's making, especially when there is not a cigarette paper indifference between the worker protections in this China deal and all the other deals that we've done, including those under Labor, not a cigarette paper difference between them, because no substance to your arguments. You've tried for weeks now, and there's been no one, forget about us, no one outside has confirmed the arguments and the cases that you're putting, because when they look into it, when they go into the depth of it, they find that the regulations and the requirements are identical. Secondly, you've got a list of requirements. If we start to put a bill down, you've got a list of requirements as long as your arm. And that's the other complication, and it'll all be directed at China and no one else.
Expired.